The fake poor mother-in-law, a truth that drove her daughter-in-law to her knees. She sat in the corner of the crumbling porch, her back slightly hunched, her palms covered in thin layers of dry skin and dust. The world had forgotten her, but today, it would remember. No one really noticed Mrs. Lawn when she walked through the market with her canvas bag and sun-bleached hat. People saw her as the poor mother of some city guy, living in that worn-down house by the railway tracks. Even her daughter-in-law, Lynn, never bothered to look deeper. Lynn had married Lan's only son, Kwa, 2 years ago. The wedding had been extravagant, hosted at a beachside resort paid for by Lynn's wealthy family. Lon had arrived at the ceremony in a faded AO dye, her shoes barely holding together. Guests whispered, "That's his mother? She looks like a housemaid." Lynn hadn't tried to stop the whispers. She had her own reasons. From the beginning, Lynn had judged Lon as backward, uneducated, and worst of all poor. A woman with no taste, no class. Lon never raised her voice about it. She just smiled. That same quiet, eerie smile that said nothing and everything. For 2 years, Lon continued living in her small home outside the city, tending a small garden, wearing the same clothes, eating plain rice and pickled vegetables. Lynn and Kwa rarely visited, and when they did, Lynn barely masked her discomfort. But Lon never once asked for money. Not a single dong. "She's too proud," Lynn would scoff. She'd rather live like a beggar than accept help. What Lynn didn't know was that every jar of pickles, every bag of vegetables Lon gave them to take home was laced with quiet observation, with love, and, perhaps, a little test. Because Lon had a secret, a truth that had been growing in silence, quietly waiting to burst. On a rainy Thursday morning, everything began to change. Kwa got the call first. "Mom collapsed," said the neighbor. She was in the garden, unconscious for hours before anyone noticed. By the time they reached the hospital, Lon was already conscious again, but weak. Lynn stood at the edge of the sterile white room, arms crossed, lips pursed. "She looks worse than usual," Lynn muttered. "Did she even eat anything these past few days?" Kwa didn't reply. He was staring at his mother, her skin pale, her lips dry, but still, that same faint smile. Lon was discharged a few days later, and Kwa insisted she come stay with them in the city. Lynn disagreed, but said nothing. It was temporary, after all, or so she thought. In their sleek, modern apartment, Lon looked entirely out of place. Her clothes hung limp, her steps were slow, and her presence quiet. She spent most of her time in the kitchen or tending to the balcony plants Lynn had long neglected. Lynn couldn't stand her. "She doesn't belong here," she complained to her friend over coffee. "She smells like old soil and boiled herbs." But then things began to happen. One day, Lynn came home to find the kitchen spotless, her favorite dishes prepared better than the housemaid ever managed. The next week, a bouquet of rare orchids appeared on the balcony, blooming magnificently. And another week later, Lynn overheard her boss speaking at a dinner party. "That old lady who came by your office? She offered to sponsor our charity fund. Wrote a check for $100 million. Said it was anonymous. But I recognized her, your mother-in-law, right?" Lynn froze. "No, you must be mistaken." But she wasn't. The truth trickled in slowly, like water through a crack in stone. Kwa confronted his mother late one evening. "Why didn't you tell me? About the donations, the savings, everything." Lon was calm. "Because I didn't need to." Turns out, Lon owned land lots of it passed down from her late husband. She had rental properties, stocks, and savings accounts that could fill rooms. She never said a word, never spent a dime on herself. She had worn the same clothes for years and ate rice with salt, while money sat untouched in the bank. Kwa was stunned. Lynn, devastated. "But why, Mom?" he asked. "Why live like you had nothing?" Lon didn't answer immediately. Her eyes drifted toward the balcony where Lynn was standing, eavesdropping silently. "Because I wanted to see who truly saw me." Lynn avoided Lon for days. Her pride wounded, her assumptions shattered. In private, she wept. Not because she felt guilty, but because she felt ashamed. Every moment of disdain, every time she turned her back on Lon, now replayed in her head like a curse. She had judged her, treated her like a burden. And all this time, Lon had the power to make or break them financially, yet never used it. Why? It wasn't until one stormy evening, when Lon asked to speak with her alone, that Lynn truly broke down. "I know what you heard," Lon said, her voice soft but steady. I was wrong, Lynn whispered, her throat tight. Lon reached out, gently placing her hand over Lynn's. You weren't wrong. You were human. And in that moment, Lynn fell to her knees. Not out of guilt, not out of fear, but out of something far deeper: humility. From that night on, everything changed. Lynn started waking up early to cook with Lon. She asked questions, listened, laughed. The walls between them, once made of silence and judgment, slowly dissolved. Lynn began bringing Lon to charity events, introducing her with pride. Not as my husband's mother, but my second mother. The transformation wasn't immediate, but it was real. And Lon smiled, still silent, still watchful. Her test was over. Weeks passed. Then one morning, Lon left quietly. No note, no goodbye, just a small envelope on the kitchen table, addressed to Lynn. Inside was a deed. For a house. A beautiful one, near the countryside, fully paid. Below it, just one line in Lynn's familiar handwriting. To the daughter who finally saw me. Lynn burst into tears. Not from sadness, but from a love she had never known she needed until it was almost too late. Lynn visited the countryside house the very next weekend. It was more than a gift. It was a message, and it was filled with pieces of lawn orchid vines blooming on the terrace, a small herb garden nestled beside a koi pond, a shelf of dusty journals in the study. Every corner of the house whispered her name. Yet, Lon was nowhere to be found. Qua tried calling. Lynn sent messages. No response. It was as if Lon had disappeared into the earth. For weeks, there was silence. Until a letter arrived. The envelope was thick and cream-colored, sealed with wax. Inside was a single note written in Lynn's neat, looping handwriting. You've seen my kindness. Now let me show you the truth. Come alone. No questions. 9 a.m. Sunday. The Yellow House. District 9. There was no signature. But Lynn knew it was her. Act 2: The Truth Beneath the Truth. The Yellow House was tucked behind a row of banana trees, almost invisible from the road. It was old, French style, with wide doors and ornate railings. When Lynn arrived, she almost turned back. It looked haunted, abandoned. But when she knocked, the door opened slowly. No one was there. Just the faint smell of incense and rain-soaked wood. Inside, the house was pristine. Lon was sitting in the center of the living room, wearing a silk dye the color of moonlight. Her hair was combed smooth, her posture upright. Around her were people: 5 elderly women and 3 men, all sharply dressed, their eyes alert and unreadable. Lynn didn't speak. Lon gestured for her to sit. The room went silent. And then, Lon began to talk. I was not always poor, she said, and I was never helpless. Lynn stared, not blinking. I built this house with your father-in-law. He was the 3rd son of a colonial merchant. We had wealth, education, and influence. But we chose simplicity. Lon paused, looking at the group around her. These people were my partners. We started a foundation, a secret one. We used our wealth to fund scholarships for children in rural provinces, rebuild storm-battered schools, and support elderly farmers who had no one. Lynn felt her pulse quicken. You were running a charity? Secretly. Lon smiled. Not just a charity. A movement. Over the next hour, Lon revealed stories that left Lynn breathless. She had once negotiated land deals in silence to prevent corporations from seizing village farmland. She had secretly funded a young doctor's education who later became the leading surgeon in Saigon. She had lived in simplicity not because she was proud but because power was quietest when invisible. And then came the hardest truth. There's one more thing, Lon said, her eyes lowering. Something I never told Qua. She reached into a lacquered box and pulled out a black and white photo. It showed a child, not Koa girl, standing beside a soldier. Her eyes were wide, haunted. She was my daughter, Lon whispered. Before Qua. Before the war. Lynn's breath caught. She died in 1975, during the evacuation. She drowned trying to save another child. I never forgave myself. Lon stood and walked slowly to the window. She was brave, fierce, and for a long time, I lived as if I had to suffer to honor her. That's why I kept myself small, wore pain like armor. She turned to Lynn, her voice cracking. But I was wrong. Pain doesn't honor the dead. Only truth does. Lynn sat in stunned silence. This woman whom she had judged, dismissed, quietly resented was bigger than she could have ever imagined. Not wealthy in the vulgar, ostentatious way. but in the soul, in choices, in sacrifice. Lon walked over, placed a gentle hand on Lin's shoulder. You have a strong mind, Lin, but it was your heart that I waited for. And now, it's time to pass this work on. Act 2 Midpoint Inheritance of Purpose. In the weeks that followed, Lon trained Lin out in wealth management, but in impact. Lin followed her into meetings with villagers, negotiations with silent donors, and late-night gatherings with street teachers and orphans. She saw the real world, the forgotten world. And slowly, Lin changed. Her old self vain, proud, self-absorbed faded. In its place rose something steadier, braver. She began handling the foundation's logistics. She learned how to speak not as someone privileged, but someone responsible. And one night, Lon said, "You no longer need me." Lin shook her head. "I'll always need you." But Lon only smiled. "You've already become more than you think." Twist the final test. Then, without warning, Lon vanished again. No letters. No calls. Except this time, she left behind something else. A scandal. The media exploded. Woman linked to secret land holdings across 3 provinces, tax evasion suspected. Lin's name appeared. So did Kwa's. The family was swarmed by journalists, whispers, threats. Kwa panicked. Was she hiding something illegal? Lin refused to believe it. She searched through Land's old papers, called every contact from the foundation. All silent. Until she found a coded notebook, hidden behind a painting. Inside, records. Legitimate donations. Tax statements. Letters of clearance from government officials. Every illegal land deal had been a protective movito prevent them from falling into corporate exploitation. Lon had faked the scandal to expose the corruption trying to steal the land she had guarded for decades. It was a trap, and it worked. The government began investigating the real estate firms involved. Within weeks, arrests were made. Land's name was cleared, but she never returned. Act 2 ends the rebirth. 1 year later, on a quiet morning in spring, Lin received a final letter. By now, you understand. I didn't want you to just see me. I wanted you to become the kind of woman who sees everything. You are that woman now. I am no longer your mother-in-law. I am your memory. Use me well. Attached was a photo of Lon standing beside a rice field, barefoot, smiling. That smile again. That endless, mysterious smile. Act 3 The Legacy. The following year passed like a slow tide, reshaping everything Lin once knew. No longer just a housewife or the woman behind a successful man, she had taken over Land's foundation. Not publicly, not yet. But beneath the surface, she was everywhere. Her days began before dawnfield visits, school projects, women's shelters. Her nights ended late meetings with donors, quiet conversations with orphans, planning, rebuilding, writing speeches. She had finally become the kind of woman Lon always knew she could be. Yet, the absence of Lon was a dull ache that never quite faded. Not grief, exactly. More like unfinished business. Until one letter changed everything. It came wrapped in a silk cloth, delivered by a barefoot boy no older than 10. No return address. Just a name scrawled across the flap. Lin. Inside, a hand-drawn map. A temple in Dalat. A mountain path. And one sentence. Come find me. Alone. Lin didn't hesitate. She packed light, told no one, not even Cohen, boarded the earliest train. Dalat welcomed her with fog and pine. She followed the hand-drawn path into the highlands, climbing winding stone steps that seemed to ascend forever. At the summit stood a small monastery, moss-covered and quiet. She found her there. Lon. Alive. Older. Thinner. But radiant in stillness. Wearing white robes. Shaven head. A Buddhist nun. Lin froze. Lon turned slowly and smiled. You made it. Her voice, softer now, but still firm. Still Lon. Lin dropped her bag, rushing forward. Why didn't you tell us? Why did you disappear again? Lon led her inside the monastery. The silence inside was sacred. I didn't disappear, Lon said gently. I ascended. Over hot tea brewed from forest herbs, Lon explained. I gave the world my time, my wealth, my body. But my soul needed space to rest. She looked at Lin, her eyes like mirrors. You didn't need me to hold your hand anymore. You only needed to believe you had mine behind you. They spoke for hours. About the land, the foundation, the future. About love, pain, pride, forgiveness. And when Lin wept not from sorrow, But from all on touched her hand and said, "You were my greatest gamble, and my greatest reward." At dawn, Lon handed Lynn a small sealed box. "Don't open it here. Open it when the time is right." Lynn nodded, heart full and breaking at once. "I want to stay with you," she whispered. Lon shook her head. "You have work to do. I have peace to keep." They embraced one final time. And just like that, Lon turned, walked back into the monastery garden, and disappeared into the mist. Months passed. Lynn didn't open the box. She waited, uncertain what she was waiting for, until the day a young girl appeared at the doorstep of the foundation. Barefoot, dust-covered, eyes fierce. I heard this was where the old lady sent brave girls. The girl's name was Mai. She was 12, homeless, and smarter than any child Lynn had ever met. Lynn fed her, cleaned her wounds, and gave her a room. That night, Lynn opened the box. Inside, a pair of gold earrings, a folded paper crane, and a single note. "Give these to the one who reminds you most of me." Years passed. Lynn expanded the foundation into 6 provinces, built schools, saved villages, trained other women in leadership and advocacy. And one day, while walking through a quiet alley in Hue, she saw a familiar figure. Bald, in white robes, sweeping leaves. Lon. They did not speak. They simply bowed and smiled. On the 5th anniversary of Lan's disappearance, Lynn stood before a crowd of journalists, teachers, and community leaders. She finally spoke publicly about Lon. Not about the money, not the scandal, not even the test, but the truth. The woman you ignored was the root of a forest. The woman you judged was the seed of a movement. And the woman you now remember was never poor. She was rich in the only way that ever mattered. She saw people, even when no one saw her. The room fell silent. Lynn reached into her pocket, pulled out a paper crane, held it to her heart, and smiled. Maida, girl with the fierce eyes, now 20, stood beside Lynn, a leader in her own right. And somewhere, in a quiet garden high in the mountains, a nun in white robes watered a small orchid, its petals just beginning to bloom. The end.